So, welcome back. Thank you for your patience and attention. It's been a really good and productive day. So we're going to have some questions and generate a little bit of a discussion, and then I will open it up to the floor. And we have about 45 minutes, I think, until we go outside, and there will be some drinks afterwards. So I think we have had three really amazing and very rich presentations this afternoon. Geraldo giving another view of overview of Schendel's work and biography, but then also focusing on the Signals exhibition in London and why, perhaps, one of the reasons why we're particularly interested in Schendel here in London. And Caue, who has been gave us a very rich view of some of Schendel's key themes, and I think also drawing particularly on the work of Hermann Schmitz to kind of highlight how important he was for Schendel, and then of course Nancy Roth dealing in a focused way about Wilhelm Flusser. I have a slightly tangential question for Geraldo, but I think he might be one of the best people to answer this. And one of the things that you mentioned in your introduction to Schendel was her relationship with the Dominican monks in São Paulo. And this is something that I find very interesting, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about her particular relationship with them and how it related to the political context of that moment in time of the late 1960s and the dictatorship in Brazil, because I think that's something that we haven't really touched on, and that's, I think, kind of a key point. So I wonder if you would talk about that.
Well, I think she had a particular relationship with the prior of the Dominican congregation, and I think it lasted maybe from the beginning of her coming to São Paulo. And then by around 68, when I think shortly before that, there was the foundation of this, the so-called, I don't know exactly how to say in English, but it's the theology of liberation, or Teologia da Libertação. That was something that was after a meeting of the Catholic high priests in Brazil, and they slowly they started to adopt a sort of political issues as a way of bringing, let's see, communion, for example. That's something that is more symbolic with the bread and everything, but then according to liberation theology, it's something that can have a political understanding as a way of creating a social union among workers, and this particular man that he left the order, that is Áureo Araújo, and he became more like a refugee in the sense of he did a clandestine work, and then at that point I think Mira started to break away of that, because she was not really interested. It's funny because she was very liberal in a way, but she didn't want to get too much involved with politics in the sense of actions or something like that. And I think for a while, I talked with two members that they both are not anymore religious. They are both, they stepped out of the order. They married and everything. And they talked to me that they used to go to her place and talk like the meaning of God and things like that. And it was very long discussions. One of them told me that sometimes the discussion would only be interrupted to go to the bathroom or to smoke a cigarette or something. And then cigarettes, I think they smoked a lot because she was a smoker, very hard smoker. And I believe that in some ways she wanted to be. She had a very particular way of thinking about freedom, that it doesn't really connect with the liberation theology, and that was the reason of it didn't follow after that.
It was to do with that aspect maybe of activism and clandestine activism that she wasn't comfortable with. Right. It's interesting. But although she might well have been well disposed towards their kind of overall intentions, but she didn't like the kind of
methods.
Yeah,
I think she probably was aware of the social injustice that was coming through the dictatorship, but I think maybe also from her previous experiences in Europe, she didn't want to get involved with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
Did she have a particularly identifiable religious belief? Did she belong to any? I mean, I know she had many interests and she read widely.
Yeah.
But did she have a kind of?
I don't think she would frequent a church or something. That she didn't. But I think that she was very much open to any type of discussion that would bring her into a state of thinking what's the meaning of religions in modern time, and that in this aspect she was interested, but not in a particular church or something.
No churches.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in this moment, in 1969, Brazil was in a dictatorial regime, and the Schendels participated to the Bienal until 1969. And I think it's a very polemic in this place because Oiticica don't want to participate, and a lot of other artists refused to participate, and Mira accepted to.
Yes, but she came with a very particular.
I was just going to say, I think Schenberg was the curator, no?
Maria Schendel was the curator of the 69. And she came with a very particular, I think maybe we should mic Isabel up. We'll bring you up on stage. Seems a bit... but she came with a very specific response, which again was to do with concepts of religion and her notion of a transcendent being. And she did also say that atheism was impossible for her. So,
particularly in this biennial 1969, she did these still waves that you showed here. And I think there is a letter that she wrote to Jag Apps, that Jag Apps had a way of dividing the view in perspectivish and aperspectivish. And then she said that from a perspective way, she would be also for the boycott. There was a general boycott, so that biennial, mainly led by Brazilian artists that were living in Europe, like Antonio Diaz, for example. And then she said from this aperspectivish, that is something that, according to her, to Gebser's theories, has a little bit to do with what you said mentioned about Flusser and the look through the structures, and you see other structures and other structures. And then she said that from that point of view, it would be okay for her to participate. And then she knew that she would be a little bit isolated from all that community of artists that were against it, but even so, she did it.
There's something in that this sense of being detached from the scene and somehow determined to pursue her own path, even though it might have detrimental impacts to her sense of belonging. I mean, there's something extraordinarily brave about taking stands which could be perceived as being, you know, reactionary and conservative, which is she was really able to deal with that. Or she she felt resistant and strong enough to kind of deal with that. But I think she was a very profoundly determined person as well, I think.
Say what Flusser said about her?
Yes,
that if she ran across weak people, she would destroy them, even though she didn't really want to do that at all. And if she ran into strong people who would resist, and he counted himself as one of them, sparks would fly.
In this biennial, it's important that her work is invisible, only lines, and there is a test about the Bible, and to talk about the power and the destruction. Then I think it's possible to think this work like a political work, religion and political work, because she knows the context, she knows where she was, and I think it's not an ingenuous participation in this biennial. In her
it's
case.
Not a
I don't know how to speak in
naive.
Naive.
No,
yeah.
it's not a naive.
Yeah.
And I think in a way, do you not think that this is somehow also a very breakthrough work for her as well? I mean, it shifts her practice, and it's quite atypical. It's quite representative of many things she's trying to achieve, but in the form it takes, it's also very atypical as well. So I don't know if you agree with that or not. That's my thinking. Yes, shall I? I was going to.
Just in relation to this one.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Oh, can you wait for the microphone, though? I should have reminded everyone of that.
I get this very clear sense that she had an ethic and she was prepared to go against the grain. But it wasn't, as you say, disingenuous or naive. So the question is, what was it grounded in? And obviously you said that somehow religion played a part. And I just wonder, I'm just thinking of like a Kierkegaardian or existential Heideggerian kind of ethic in which you take a stand against the group. I just wonder what she was performing and what it was grounded in and what allowed her to take a stand against the group, the ethics of the group.
This is tough to... Yeah.
It's an important question.
It's very hard to define which is the group that you are relating to.
Yeah.
Because if you have to understand that there is something that is a real situation, a political pressure outside in the real Brazilian, and then there is the biennial that is more like a symbolic place. And of course, the people that were leading the boycott, they wanted. I don't know if you refer to these people as the group. You mean the boycotters, or? And then I think that she was living there. She was not in Europe, for example, like Antonio Diaz.
Yes.
And then I think she was sensing that it was, like Isabel said, Mario Schember had invited her.
Yes.
And she felt, like among other reasons, that she couldn't, she should give a response to that invitation. And I feel like she was very brilliant, like Caue said, in the sort of work that she chose to display there, because it was in a time where installation was not even a name in the art scene, and what she did was already an installation. And I felt like the work was expecting from the beholder more a contemplative attitude as a participation, like it was in the days word of order or something, a parole that was like in other artists were doing. And I think in this sense, I think she took a political stand, and she kept doing her work. That's what she was able to. She was an artist, and she did what an artist should do, I believe.
It's also on the same kind of topic. Geraldo was talking about her distancing from the Dominican kind of fraternity. I don't know what the term is, but I was wondering what time, what dates that happened. Whether it was kind of towards the mid to late 60s, or because I think that might give us a clue. I mean, I'm speaking as a kind of complete non-specialist. That might give us a clue to the kind of to understanding her position with regard to the biennial, the 69 biennial, in terms of a kind of conjunction of her deep kind of interest in spirituality, if not religion per se, but also in terms of what Isabel was talking earlier this morning about the differentiation between nihilism and what's the other term?
Like
Nihility. Nihility. I think all these issues might be, I have intuitively kind of hearing all these kind of issues intercross. I think all of these might kind of inform somehow this kind of perhaps what we could would today understand as a strange decision to kind of break the boycott.
I think you're right. I think that in 1968 is when this hardening of the dictatorship started. And then at that point, many leftist groups started to do radical actions. And I think for that kind of actions, she wanted to take distance. And there was, for example, she was very befriended with Amelia Toledo. They were neighbors. They lived in Santo Amaro in Brazil. And then when Amelia was part of the faculty in the University of Brasilia, that all the faculty was sent to exile. And when she came back, I did an interview with Amelia, and she told me that Mira wants to have a distance from her, and she never understood, because I think it was the way that she wanted to deal with these issues. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I was just thinking of something related to this. I don't recall the exact date, but there's, and maybe Caue and Geraldo remember it as well, there was a certain moment, I think in the 80s, where she participates in a discussion, I think maybe at the Pinacoteca or the FAPI, where she's really confronted very strongly by a younger generation of artists who accuse her of being bourgeois, and it's the same kind. It's a similar dynamic with the Biennale, I think, where there's a group of artists who are saying it means this if you participate, and she's coming at it from this entirely different kind of resistance, this entirely different kind of ethic.
And with a completely different language.
Yeah, and the generational divide is perhaps what makes us want her to be political as well. In a way, you can say that, I don't know, Antonio Manuel is political, or if you boycott, it's political, but it sort of forces a different understanding of what that participation meant, more kind of, and I think it has a relationship to, like you were saying, to the fact that if you've been through so many consecutive political moments earlier.
Yeah.
And there was another, sorry, I'll shut up after. There was another moment when she showed the works with the gold leaf, and students hurled drinks at them and tried to scratch off the gold because it was a moment of kind of economic difficulty. And again, she's very kind of sanguine in how she reacts to people politicizing the work in this way. And I know she said something like, I think it's interesting because it was provocative, but not really. She just has a different kind of political perspective to the simple poster-making, boycotting, talking about the dictatorship in kind of explicit terms.
I think she has a self-awareness of herself as a provocative person as well, and I think she realizes that by the late 60s, and certainly by the 70s, 80s, she knows that this is, that she has tensions with people. And in describing Still Waves of Probability, there's one text where she says, it's only made of nylon, and if people destroy it, I don't care, because it's only going to be like $12 to make this installation. Which is, again, what we were talking about earlier with her kind of approach to materials as well. But I think that what you were bringing up there, Isabel, was exactly what I was also going to maybe move the conversation along to, which was the issues to do with exile and creativity, which is where you ended your presentation, Nancy, and that we were discussing a little bit outside of how her position differed from that of flusses and where they coincided and where they diverged. Should we say that?
I'm sure there were many diversions. But it seems to me she would conceive of freedom something like he did, which is the freedom to be yourself. Mm-hmm. And he seems to say that quite clearly in The Exile and Creativity, that you've got, you know, everything you bring with you, and you've got this very chaotic flow of information in the new place, and to bring them into some kind of meaningful harmony, mm-hmm. to be able to do that is to be free. So, I mean, if somebody telling you shouldn't have gold on your pieces in the show, you're going to be able to say, well, that's just not the deal. That's just not important to me. I can see that very clearly. That seems okay.
Shall we open it up now onto the and a bit more and beyond the first row? And yes, and see if anyone else has some questions.
Did she ever have a Jungian psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, or did she just read? Her interest in Jungian, I mean, did she meditate as a Zen practice, or was her art practice her Zen practice, and was her practice her form of transformation, technology for transformation, and these terrace conversations? Or did she also have another practice which was to undergo some time on the couch? I just wonder, in relation to bringing this harmony of exile and chaotic flow together.
Well, and what comes to therapy, I think she used to be very fond on a very strange psychiatrist that is Leopold Zondi. Leopold Zondi is a man that has a sort of cards where you apply tests, and then for the short time when she was teaching at her home, that was her studio, she used to ask the students at first to perform the test. And the test, she would check what would be the personality of that person. And nowadays, I think Zondi is very discredited for the psychology circles, and I feel like she came from one topic to another very freely, like you said. I think for a period of time, when an author would interested to her, she would read like crazy, and she would bring everything that she could from the theory of that author. And then I think that's, I don't know if that's in the direction that you asked me, or, okay.
Geraldo, you mentioned a list at the end of your talk about the different categories in which she found herself. Bohemian, Judeo-Christian perhaps, Roman Catholic. Are these the kinds of boundary markers in a way that helped her identify herself within these exiles? Well,
actually, those are markers that I established for my study. It's not her. You know, I try to understand the work in this two main guide marks, because I think it has to do with her origins, and at the same time would explain why she's interested in like in the visual arts, why she simply wrote. That's more like in this Jewish tradition of negating the image. But I feel like she was also, she had this like Tanya mentioned. She grew up in this library in the same building of the Brera Fine Arts Museum. So when the mother was with this Count Gnoli, and then I think she was able to see all that collection, and I felt like that must have a strong influence on her development towards the visual arts as well. And I think it's a hypothesis of my thesis. I draw these lines, but I don't know if she herself would say that. I think she was more like in free human being, you know, in the world.
Nancy, just one last thing is that you said something about how she was in her conversations with Flusser. The topic was always about herself. Her work, yes, her work. And every artist does nothing but look for something to help them figure out what they're trying to do, which I think would probably explain why she would find an author who wrote something and then absorb absolutely everything in an addictive fashion in order to try and keep gleaning that little nugget that's going to help her find what she's seeking. Well, I think that's probably, my just opinion is that that's why she was talking to absolutely everybody. She was talking to the Franciscan monks, she was talking to the philosophers, she was talking to the other artists, she was just looking, she was on that search.
Going back to that question of religion, it might be interesting to compare. Geraldo was speaking about Dom Sylvestre Huedar as somebody who befriended Mira when she was in London. He's a Dominican monk living in a monastery, but he had several things going on in his life. One was that he was absolutely up to the cutting edge in terms of avant-garde art. He was into concrete poetry, kinetic art. He even wrote prose in a particularly sort of abbreviated form that he thought was kinetic. But at the same time, although it's a different constituency and is not so well known to people, he was struggling to pull down the barriers between the different religions in the world, a kind of ecumenical struggle, which I don't know anything about in detail, but I know it's existed because in his archive, which interestingly enough is also at the John Rylands Library in Manchester, some of these writings connected with overcoming the division between religions and saying that actually they're all basically the same. Yeah, I think. I mean, Dom Sylvestre was a character at least as remarkable as Mira, and then so both their stories are really very, very, very interesting. And he's not recognized here. I mean, Dom Sylvestre, you can look in vain for his work in the Tate Gallery or the V&A have a selection of his works, but as far as I know, they may have shown them about 40 years ago, but they hasn't been seen. So there's nowhere you can actually see his typewriter poems, which are...
There's an event, it was worth mentioning, there's an event...
Do you want to do the mic?
There's going to be an event, do you know about this event at the South London Gallery quite soon?
Yeah, I meant to mention that. I have to look
The
in my diary to see
the 1st of December, I think, which
Not
is
the
intended
first,
as a
no.
sort of Dom Sylvestre Huedar
There's a day devoted
revival.
to him. What?
Like a way of connecting all the people who are interested in him and bringing them together for one
That's
day.
right.
This is what I understand.
That's right. That's happening at the South London Gallery on December...
The 1st.
No, it's not the 1st. No.
Okay.
It may well be the 2nd. Do you mind if I just try and...
I saw in Mira's records that she was in a show together with him in a Lisson Gallery.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was here in 1998, I went to the Lisson Gallery and I did an interview with the man, it's Nicholas Logsdale.
That's right.
And he said that he tried to keep an interest with the work by Dom Sylvestre, but he said that the gallery changed into more minimal art, and he said that I was in my paper before, but I made it short because of the time and my lack of fluency in English. But I felt like it was I think it was a momentary time where the art scene was still coming from had Paris as a model for language in the art, and then with minimalism, I think this scene changed, and I think the gallery to survive decided not to show his work anymore. I think Mira had a show there, I think twice after the Signals Gallery. I think through the mediation of Don Sylvester.
Nicholas Longstaff was also interested in Li Wanqi's work, and actually, and had some in his collection until we managed to persuade him.
May I just slip in the date for this? The 2nd of December at the South London Art Gallery.
Don Sylvester Day.
It's important to be correct. Corrected. Fantastic. But you were saying, Guy, and now I'm asking a question off the stage into the audience, but you were saying about how Dom Sylvester and was quite as remarkable a character as Mira. So how did they get on? How did they interact? She met him in London when she was here. So how did they get on? Well, considering we've heard about how she reacted to strong and weak personalities, how did they get on?
I wasn't on the fly on the wall. So
but you were around, so.
Well, I know that, for example, Li Wanqi, the Chinese artist, Dom Sylvester and Mira were all interested in one another. Li actually had a small publishing company in his museum in Cumbria, and he published a book of Dom Sylvester's poetry called, and he called the poems Reversals, which is quite interesting because one of the Caue's talk was called the Reversal. Dom Sylvester invented this kind of script whereby you could read it upside down and backwards and forwards, and it would one meaning would meld into the next just by turning. They were on translucent paper, and just by turning from the back to the front, another word appeared. They were published in little pockets in this book. It's quite a rarity now. It's a very nice book. And as you said, Li and Mira communicated in Italian. I think you've seen those letters, but I haven't ever, because they're in Ada Schendel has them now, I think.
In San Paolo.
Barrett and Wittgenstein.
Can you wait just for them?
Sorry.
Well, this is a Jesuit priest, Sara Barrett. You know a lot about him, Geraldo, because you. I don't know what. I have completely. After he published his little book on op art, I never really saw him after that. I didn't know what happened to him, what he's up to now. But
because you made very specific. Sorry, it's just you made very specific points about her practice in relation to his thoughts and Wittgenstein in relation to faith and psychological violence, which I didn't quite understand.
I think there was a time when Wittgenstein was here in England, and he gave courses here, and Sara Barrett was one of the students. And then when I went to Oxford to meet him, he gave me a book that is based on his notes that he took during this course. And I think, I don't know exactly how it happens, but through Wittgenstein, he started to be interested in modern art and particularly in optical art. And that's what's his interest went on.
And it's manifested in her practice in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Sara Barrett is also, I think Isabel's written about this, is also the connection between John Henry Newman and Schendel. But that's another convoluted line, so maybe we should...
Seems like she's always in dialogue.
She is. Yeah, I think we're beginning to get the sense of how much. Are there any other questions or comments from the audience?
I'm just following on from what Jean was asking.
Wait for a microphone.
It was just there was something really specific in the letter. I think you were asking this as well about a disagreement between Barrett and Schendel, or a disagreement between on the subject of belief.
There's a disagreement, but she mentioned that it's already dissipated and has to do with something to do with faith. And she mentioned that in the moment where faith would be psychological violence, and I assume that she's talking about the closing of the gallery in the middle of the show.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering or speculating, whether it was particularly to do with that situation, which must have been quite a violence for those involved in signals as well.
It was a nightmare, a complete nightmare, because it feels like sort of raking up something from the past, but. And of course it was complex, but when it was called The Man, was actually Paul Keeler's father, who lent the building in Wigmore Street, which was a big building on sort of 4 or 5 floors, and each signals exhibition occupied the whole building, and there was a big wall on the ground on the street level, which you could see through the plate glass windows. And David Madalla would always commission each artist to make a work for this big wall. And some amazing works were made, and we kind of lost track of some of them. But the one that Soto made, for example, it turned up in the Museum of Modern Art in Caracas. How it got there, I don't know, but when Signals closed down, it was a question of, partly a question of deciding which works belong to the artists and which works belong to the gallery. And so that led to a lot of correspondence and attempts to prevent the liquidator from taking all the work for the company's creditors. I mean, I don't want to, it's a long story, but it was a traumatic experience. And we were all sort of like 21, 22, and we didn't really know about galleries and how they all...
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to say thank you to all of our speakers from today, who I think have done an extraordinary job at bringing Mira to our greater understanding and perplexity as well. I think it's the more we find out about Schendel, the more complex she appears. And I think, in summing up, I'd like to say, you know, when I've been reading about her, I was reading in Geraldo's book about how when she first arrived in São Paulo in the early 50s, she was delighted to find the library there, and she comments on how all of the books of Husserl are in the library, and there's some more books, there's some books about art as well. But this character who arrives, and I think, you know, still in a sense of naivety in discovering what an enormous city can offer her, to a character who is then later interested in Zen and traveling around Europe and reading Jung and the intellectual journey that this artist goes on from Husserl to Jung and Zen and via Hermann Schmitz is an absolutely extraordinary one. And I think there's so much to unpick in her work, and I think we've done a pretty good job of addressing some of that also with Flusser today, and I hope we'll be able to continue tomorrow. But if you'd like to join me in thanking our speakers from today.